Kash Patel and Pam Bondi didn't wait to be accused, they struck first. That's what made them dangerous. While most bureaucrats scramble after the story breaks, these two were already rewriting the script before anyone else had read the first page. At exactly 2:07 a.m., in a dimly lit office on the east end of Capitol Hill, a secure fax machine sputtered to life. What emerged wasn't long. 79 words, no title, no preamble. Just raw, surgical language. Deportation executed under DOD transport. No court record. No guardian notification. Priority closed. No signature, but it didn't need one. The tone reeked of authority, covert, deliberate, and fully authorized by someone with stars on their collar and clearance high enough to kill a story before it had a name. Jasmine Crockett read it first. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. But when a young staffer instinctively reached for his phone, she cut him off without raising her voice. "You post this before we verify. You kill it. Understood?" The kid froze mid-scroll. Across the room, AOC had barely looked up from her coffee. She took one glance at the printout and said what no one else dared to think out loud. "This isn't a leak. This is bait." That was the moment the air changed in the room. Not because of the paper, because of the readiness, the precision, the cold, mechanical timing of something that was never meant to be hidden for long, just long enough. Meanwhile, across town at the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi was already 5 moves ahead. A report slid onto her desk like a dagger she'd ordered hours ago. Left-wing offices may have accessed restricted ICE correspondence, it read. Recommend preemptive clarification. Pam didn't blink. She didn't ask who saw what or how bad it looked. She just reached for her pen and signed off the pre-drafted media response without changing a single word. The language was classic Bondi, polished, unyielding, and lethal. No unauthorized deportation occurred. All actions followed protocols designed to neutralize active threats. It wasn't a denial. It was a declaration of dominance. At the same time, deep in a sub-level communications room, Kash Patel stood before his media strike team. No notes, no prep, just that cold, effortless certainty that has always terrified both allies and enemies alike. "We don't confirm leaks," he told them. "We define them. If they want a storm, we bring the thunder first." There was no hesitation. Within minutes, top-tier journalists from CNN to The Times received DOJ talking points. Fast, clean, ruthless. Back in AOC's war room, Jasmine stared at the timeline. 20 minutes. That's how long it took for DOJ to spin a national security narrative. Too fast for reaction. Too quiet for panic. "They were ready," AOC said, her voice low and flat. They knew this would surface. The room went still. No one said what they were all thinking, that this wasn't damage control. This was orchestration. A script rehearsed long before the first fax came through. This was no accidental leak. It was a warning shot, a message hidden in compliance. And Patel and Bondi? They weren't trying to cover their tracks. They were laying out the map, daring anyone to follow. The USB didn't scream. It whispered. No envelope, no return label, just a sleek drive stamped with the ProPublica logo, left on a desk like an inside joke between traitors. AOC plugged it in, expecting something redacted, sanitized, cowardly. What blinked open instead was bold, polished, and criminally calm. Memos official, threaded, time-stamped detailing a strategic prisoner swap framework. DOJ. ICE, State Department, all smiling in the email headers like they'd just brokered a hotel discount, not a human transaction. She scrolled fast, then stopped. Return package includes selected migrant units, ages unaccompanied. Jasmine read over her shoulder, jaw tightening. Units, she muttered. Not people, not children, not cases. Units, like printer cartridges or military rations. That was the vocabulary now wore logistics in place of names. It wasn't a clerical error. It was doctrine. Elsewhere, in a DOJ conference room sterilized of conscience, Kash Patel stood before a map of El Salvador, drawing neat little circles. "You think this was immoral?" he said, voice smooth like someone ordering airstrikes between sips of tea. "Fine, but it worked. We brought allies home and deported liabilities. Liabilities, not minors, not asylum seekers, just clutter, excess, political ballast that needed dumping." Pam Bondi sat near him, calm as static. "They'll scream about ethics," she said, not even hiding the smirk. "We'll speak about results." That was the whole game plan: preempt the moral outrage by sounding like a CEO justifying layoffs. Turn displacement into math, make suffering efficient. But AOC saw through it. "They're not hiding anymore," she said, pushing her chair back with a slow scrape. "They're calling it strategy." Jasmine didn't blink. "Then we stop calling it scandal," she said. "We call it war." And that's exactly what it was. Not a misstep, not a rogue initiative. A fully authorized, pre-cleared pipeline of lives, processed, packaged, and bartered at the highest levels. No shame, no secrecy, just the system operating exactly as intended. The question now wasn't who signed off. The question was who didn't, and more urgently, who thought this would stay buried. The truth didn't crawl out. It detonated. And by the time the smoke reached cable news headquarters, both sides had already set up their podiums like rival popes at war for moral authority. In the war room, under the dim buzz of a busted ceiling light, AOC stood before a whiteboard covered in red Sharpie slashes, arrows, and names that looked less like a strategy map and more like a prosecutor's dream. At the top, in all caps, the operation's code name: Operation Fracture. She turned to Jasmine, eyes sharp, voice sharper. "We hit fast, but not loud. No hysteria, only facts. We let the country get angry, not us. No theatrics, no tears, just calculated exposure, like slicing a wire without setting off the bomb. But bombs don't wait." Across town, Pam Bondi was already on Fox News, dressed in white like irony itself. Her voice oozed calm rage, the kind of tone usually reserved for botched Christmas ads or people who say "bless your heart" before professionally gutting you. "It's not a crime to protect Americans," she said, hands folded like the Virgin Mary in litigation heels. "It's a duty. And that's what we did. No apologies. No apologies indeed, from the woman whose legal logic could probably excuse arson if you claimed the building had suspicious energy." Meanwhile, Kash Patel wasn't wasting time either. He'd already blasted legal justifications to every network inbox east of the Rockies. His playbook? Vintage bureaucratic necromancy. Pages of declassified Obama-era counter-terror memos repackaged as moral alibis. If the former president had once authorized drone strikes, surely using military planes to deport children without court review was just a modern upgrade, like a Fitbit for civil liberties. At 8:02 a.m., Jasmine Crockett stepped into her own press conference. No entourage, no spin team, just fury in a suit. She held up a manifest like it was Exhibit A in a war crimes trial. "Here's the name of a 9-year-old girl," she said, voice low but flammable. "Deported without hearing, no family, no return plan, only a barcode, no adjectives, no editorializing, just data and the damnation it carried." But DOJ wasn't going to let facts ruin a good counter-program. Within minutes, their own press room lit up with matching suits and preloaded talking points. Pam Bondi again, now backed by men in dark ties and stiffer necks, declared into a dozen microphones. These were coordinated repatriations during a high-threat environment. The children weren't victims, they were shields used by traffickers. You had to admire the phrasing. Shield's a word that shifts the blame from the ones holding the guns to the ones absorbing the bullets. In Pam Bondi's world, children weren't harmed. They were simply in the way of adult heroism. The press, predictably, played it like a Super Bowl. CNN led with deported minors, court bypass exposed. Fox fired back with Trump officials. Crackdown disrupted child trafficking rings. One screen, two Americas. Same footage, opposite storylines. Back in the war room, AOC stared at the split screen in silence. For a second, no one moved. Then she spoke, calm and devastating. "They're not just fighting us. They're trying to split the country down the middle again." She wasn't wrong. This wasn't about legality. It was about narrative real estate. If they couldn't win the truth, they'd flood the zone with just enough noise to make reality feel like a partisan construct. Children? Data points. Ethics? Optional. Facts? Weapons if you know how to swing them. But AOC and Jasmine weren't swinging. They were sharpening. And in that moment it became clear this wasn't the story Patel and Bondi were preparing for. The next move wouldn't come from a press release. It would come from the one thing they feared more than evidence: silence that ended in eruption. The gavel cracked once, no preamble, no throat-clearing niceties. Just the sound of a chamber transformed into a courtroom with no ceiling high enough to contain what was about to drop. AOC didn't wait for permission. She walked straight to the microphone, the heels of her boots slicing through the tension like piano wire. In her hand, a thick folder, unassuming on the outside, nuclear on the inside. She slammed it onto the desk in front of Kash Patel. The top page was visible to all. Subject: female, 7. No guardian. Destination: Venezuela. There were no footnotes, no redactions, just raw administrative carnage delivered in Times New Roman. The room inhaled and forgot to exhale. Kash glanced down at the file, gave it the 3 seconds it didn't deserve, then looked up with the expression of a man giving a TED Talk on why gravity is optional. "Traffickers use children as decoys," he said flatly. "We neutralize the tactic." Neutralize. As if he were talking about termites, not toddlers. As if the word decoy somehow deleted the word human. Jasmine Crockett didn't wait her turn. She stood, calm but volcanic, eyes locked on Kash like she was measuring him for a moral autopsy. "So you threw the child away to catch the bait?" Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. The question sliced through the committee room sharper than any objection. Pam Bondi, seated next to Kash like the last line of a dying administration's legal defense, smiled with that familiar Bondi half-smirk, the kind that looks less like empathy and more like contempt wearing lipstick. She opened her own file, flipping pages as if she were skimming a brunch menu. "The names you hold up are tragic," she said, honeyed and hollow, but they came through smuggler channels. The threat was real. The removals were legal. In Bondi speak, everything becomes clean once you say it slowly. AOC didn't flinch. She simply reached behind her, clicked a remote, and brought up a screen the size of a small billboard. A flight path lit up. Military transport, time-stamped, landing coordinates, a line drawn directly through a standing court injunction like a boot print on a restraining order. Pam didn't miss a beat. The court didn't instruct us to wait until death rang the doorbell, she snapped. National interest trumps court delays. Say what you will about Bondish never shies away from turning authoritarianism into a TED Talk. That's when a Republican congressman leaned forward, voice dripping with performative patriotism. Do the witnesses believe the Constitution requires us to die nicely? It wasn't a question. It was theater. A bumper sticker masquerading as philosophy. The kind of question that gets clipped and fed to donors by breakfast. Jasmine didn't blink. No, she said. It requires us not to become the people we claim to be running from. No dramatics, just the kind of moral clarity you can't fit on a campaign flyer. The silence that followed wasn't respectful, it was wounded. Because deep down, even the most committed partisans in that room knew, this wasn't about border policy. It was about what kind of country stares at a deportation form for a 7-year-old and calls it a win. And in that moment, no amount of smirks, memos, or national security buzzwords could drown out what had just been laid bare. Not by rhetoric, by record. And the record wasn't going away. AOC didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The power was in the pace, one line at a time, one slice deeper than the last. DOJ pre-cleared flight manifests, civil injunctions marked as non-binding, subject ages 6, 8, 11. The words hung in the air like fog laced with gasoline. Every syllable dripped in bureaucracy, yet every sentence burned with something unmistakably human. She lowered the page, eyes locked on Kash Patel. No sarcasm, no outrage, just a surgical indictment. You called these children logistical burdens. Kash didn't blink. I called them vulnerabilities, he replied, voice calm as a scalpel. Infiltration routes hide behind innocence. We closed those routes. Closed. As if border policy now came with a body count, and childhood itself had become a national security risk. His logic was airtight only if you vacuum-sealed your conscience. Jasmine didn't wait, and buried the kids with them. The words cut through the marble echo chamber like a courtroom exorcism. Not poetic, not exaggerated, just the plain, brutal truth of what happens when paperwork replaces people. That's when Pam Bondi stood, slowly and deliberately, like she was walking up to accept an award for most unapologetic public servant. Her heels clicked with a cadence that could double as warning shots. The opposition speaks of moral rot, she began, tone steady, theatrically grave. I see moral courage-making calls no one else had the spine to make. Pam didn't come to play defense. She came to reframe cruelty as clarity. In her world, every minor deported was a line drawn bravely. Every injunction ignored? A medal of valor. AOC didn't flinch. She just leaned slightly forward and said, "That wasn't courage. That was cowardice wrapped in paperwork. No theatrics. Just truth quiet and unforgiving. The way truth is when it no longer cares who's uncomfortable." Pam struck back like clockwork. Says the congresswoman who's never had to call a mother and tell her child died because the plane didn't leave fast enough. Her voice cracked slightly at the edges, not from emotion, but from the sheer effort of weaponizing tragedy into applause lines. She knew how to play the room. But she didn't notice the room was no longer playing with her. The committee exploded. Gasps, shouting, chair legs scraping marble. The chairman hammered the gavel like it owed him money. "Order!" he barked, but the damage had already cracked the chamber walls. Meanwhile, in the hallway just outside, a reporter's mic caught Jasmine Crockett walking out, shoulders tight, breath heavy. "They're not even pretending it was legal," she muttered. One sentence. No spin. The kind of quote that didn't need context to go viral. And by 8 p.m., it had. CNN ran it raw. No banner, no background music. Just the feed of Jasmine saying what the room inside hadn't dared admit aloud. Moments later, Anderson Cooper closed his segment with a verdict not of opinion, but of contrast. "This isn't policy versus opinion," he said, voice crisp and cold. "It's law versus force. The question now wasn't who was louder. It was who could still hear the Constitution through all the static. At 3 a.m., when most of Washington was asleep, or pretending to be someone inside the Department of Justice hit send. No name, no digital footprint, just one chilling subject line uploaded from an anonymous email. Bukele Coordination Memo. DOJ Sign-Off. 37 pages, never before seen by any court, any committee, or any journalist. It was the kind of file that doesn't leak, detonates. The alert came in like a fire alarm. Pam Bondi was summoned. Kash Patel was already en route. By the time the lights blinked on in DOJ's subterranean briefing room, the atmosphere had shifted from war room to fallout shelter. Kash entered like he'd been expecting this hour. He didn't pace. He didn't blink. He delivered his line with the stillness of someone whose pulse couldn't be bothered. "If this surfaces," he said, "we don't apologize. We escalate." And escalate they did. Pam Bondi, ever the queen of the last word doctrine, had a press statement drafted, edited, and distributed in 18 minutes flat. Her opening line sounded less like a denial and more like a recruitment poster. "We acted under classified threat assessments." That's not shameful. That's what leadership looks like. It was the rhetorical version of wrapping a Molotov cocktail in the American flag and calling it Homeland Security. But the other side wasn't playing by press release. AOC went live on MSNBC that afternoon. No dramatic lighting, no fire in her voice, just a scalpel's edge. She read, line for line, the same memo DOJ claimed was national security sacred text. Then she looked straight at the camera. Classified threat doesn't excuse classified trafficking. You don't fight terror by becoming it. No dramatics, just reality, delivered like a court order. Hours later, Jasmine Crockett took the stage on Morning Joe. No makeup team, no campaign flair. Just a printed list, 87 names, each a child deported without legal counsel, court order, or documented process. She placed it on the table like a tombstone. "Not accusations," she said. "Records." The clip that went viral wasn't even from the interview. It was from the 10 seconds after. Jasmine staring dead into the lens, eyes bloodshot but voice steady. They used national security like a chainsaw. "We're here to take it back." 10 seconds. That's all it took for the hashtag war to turn into a reckoning. By sunset, an internal DOJ email leaked to The Intercept. Media escalation unmanageable. Prep individual legal shields. A sentence that read more like a confession than a contingency plan. Inside DOJ headquarters, the lights stayed on all night. Phones rang, doors slammed, but the voices got quieter. Not out of professionalism, not even out of fatigue, but fear. The kind of fear that doesn't shout, it whispers. The kind that crawls up the spine when you realize the cover story is now part of the crime scene. And outside those steel doors, the storm was no longer coming. It had already stepped inside. By the third day, silence had stopped being a strategy and started sounding like guilt. That morning, the internet didn't wake up. It got slapped across the face. A 98-page document dropped like a guillotine from the hands of an anonymous whistleblower. Alongside it, a grainy audio file. No narration, no music. Just the hollow acoustics of a government conference room and a voice a man, calm, certain, and absolutely damning. We needed the kids moved before the court blocked us. Bukele wasn't going to wait. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't out of context. It was a confession, served raw. Jasmine Crockett stood on the lawn at Howard University later that day, not behind a podium, not in front of donors, just standing there, sleeves rolled up and fire lit. They didn't circumvent courts because they feared delay, she said, pacing slowly, voice low and surgical. They feared losing the deal. It was the kind of statement that doesn't need a microphone to echo. She wasn't asking for outrage. She was inviting understanding of how far a government will bend law when ambition comes knocking in a suit with foreign stamps. Pam Bondi, of course, struck back. She always does. Hours later, in a press conference, staged like a legal drama pilot, she stepped up to the mic, wrapped in sarcasm like it was a designer coat. "I'm amazed how fast fiction gets passed around when fear meets politics," she quipped, flashing the kind of smile that's usually followed by someone being disbarred. She thought she'd crushed it, until a reporter raised a hand and didn't ask a question. Instead, he read aloud the subject line of a newly obtained email, handed to him mid-briefing by a newsroom intern with shaking fingers. "Final Bukele clearance. Signed, DOJ Policy Director." The silence that followed wasn't respectful. It was tactical. Pam didn't flinch, but even her silence seemed rehearsed. Like she knew this part of the script was coming, but didn't have time to rewrite the ending. Kash Patel, by contrast, vanished from the public schedule like a magician trying to beat his own disappearing act. When he did reappear, it was on Fox News, face blurred in low-resolution footage that looked like it was shot from inside a bunker. He didn't deliver a rebuttal. He delivered a martyr monologue. "I don't need to be liked," he said, voice flat. "I just needed to keep this country alive. Because apparently, keeping a country alive now includes ghosting due process and outsourcing morality to foreign strongmen." AOC didn't grant interviews. She didn't go on air. She didn't take a victory lap. She just posted one photo. The leaked 98-page file, printed, marked, and stacked like a tombstone on her desk. The caption? They hid it in law. "We dragged it into sunlight. No hashtags, no slogans, just a quiet, brutal truth. That what had once been hidden under the weight of official signatures and legalese was now being read by every voter with a Wi-Fi connection. And once the sunlight hits the rot, it's not a matter of if the structure collapses, it's how loud." The Constitution didn't scream. It just finally spoke, and the courts listened. The first ruling came from Maryland. its language clinical but cold-blooded. The DOJ under the Trump administration committed blatant violations of constitutional due process. No hedging, no room for spin. It was the kind of sentence that doesn't end an argument. It buries one. Within 36 hours, the tremor turned into a landslide. Federal courts in New York, California, and Illinois followed suit, issuing near-identical rulings. But they didn't stop at statements. They opened civil suits, real ones, with teeth. And for the first time in a long time, sovereign immunity didn't sound like an escape hatch. It sounded like a dare. The national media, usually cautious in its pivot from speculation to conclusion, didn't flinch this time. MSNBC kicked off its primetime broadcast with a sentence that landed like a closing gavel. This wasn't mismanagement. It was coordinated defiance of the Constitution. Not a fumble, not a lapse, a plan. Crafted, rehearsed, and executed until it wasn't. Outside a courthouse in Chicago, Jasmine Crockett emerged with a new subpoena in one hand and a press line waiting like sharks in suits. She didn't grandstand. She didn't whisper. "This isn't about blame," she said. "It's about boundaries." They crossed all of them. Simple, devastating, and immune to counter-spin. Because when the legal system starts issuing phrases like coordinated defiance, you don't argue unless you're looking to be Exhibit B. Meanwhile, inside the DOJ, panic had stopped hiding behind policy memos. An internal email leaked that afternoon told the story better than any press conference ever could. Recommend all leadership, acquire private counsel. Exposure deemed terminal. There it was, in-house confirmation that this wasn't just political heat, it was legal fire, and it was crawling up the walls. Pam Bondi, loyal to the end or maybe just to the narrative, gave what might have been her last public address from the DOJ steps. The sun was low, the tension lower. Her voice was defiant but tattered. "History won't judge me kindly," she said, "but at least it will know I stood up." It was the kind of line that sounds brave if you don't know what actually happened. AOC didn't call a press conference. She didn't do a victory tour. She posted a single tweet. No filter, no hashtags. Just the words. "You didn't stand up. You stepped over children." No retweet could save that. No statement could spin it. Because by this point, even the most committed defenders of the old script had to face the music or at least start looking for lawyers who charged by the hour, not by the body count. And out in the streets, across courtrooms, in newsrooms, and at kitchen tables, people weren't just listening. They were remembering. Because constitutional violations make headlines. But what you do after being caught, that writes history. On Friday night, Washington didn't sleep, it stood vigil. As darkness folded over the National Mall, thousands flooded the grounds with candles in hand and grief printed on glossy cardstock. Each photo held high wasn't just a face, it was a sentence. Children. Deported. Forgotten by bureaucracy. Remembered by name. The kind of silent assembly that doesn't shout, but drowns everything in meaning. The air was thick, not with noise, but with a tension so real it could have been cut with one of the redacted memos that started it all. Then came the moment that would ricochet across the country in less time than it takes to draft a press release. A 10-second video, shaky, unfiltered, shot on a phone that had seen too much already. A children, maybe 11, took the mic, voice trembling but clear. "They took my cousin," he said. "She was 6. She didn't come back. She didn't come back. The crowd didn't gasp. They already knew, they just hadn't heard it from someone so small, telling a truth that cut through every talking point like glass through silk. AOC stepped up to the platform. No mic, no teleprompter, just her voice, steady and brutal. "You can't deport shame," she said. "You can only bury it, and we dug it back up." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. It wasn't a rally. It was a reckoning. Next to her, Jasmine Crockett lifted a piece of paper into the night sky, creased, photocopied, but unmistakable. "This," she said, voice sharp as flint, "is the paper trail of betrayal. No dramatics, no flourish, just a simple, irreversible truth. What was done had been documented. What was hidden had been filed. And now the system that produced it was hemorrhaging in real time. Across every platform, the hashtags erupted like firecrackers in a thunderstorm. #justice for the children. #traitor flights. #Bondi knew. No more hiding. They weren't digital noise. They were the modern equivalent of carving names into monuments, and every name was an indictment. On CNN, the ticker didn't blink. It barked. DOJ crisis widens, resignations surge, federal oversight incoming. The chyron may as well have been a death certificate for the last threads of credibility left inside the department. The phrase incoming oversight hadn't sounded so much like a threat since Watergate. Inside DOJ headquarters, the aftershocks hit harder than any court order. Junior staffers slipped out with cardboard boxes and eyes glued to the floor. Nameplates came off doors. Coffee mugs were left behind like relics from a war that no one won. No one said much, not because they didn't care, but because they finally realized what they had been a part of, and no memo, no spin, no clearance level could clean that off a conscience. This wasn't just the end of a news cycle. It was the start of a national memory. And the question wasn't whether the country would move on it, was whether it would ever forgive itself for needing to be shown. Monday morning arrived not like a sunrise, but like a subpoena. By 9 a.m., the number of active federal lawsuits had breached 40. 17 state attorneys general had jointly petitioned the Justice Department, what was left of it, for a federal criminal investigation into its own operations. And for the first time since 2016, Trump's approval rating didn't just dip. It collapsed 30 points down in 5 days, dragging Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania with it. States that once swung red now looked blue with fury. The political earthquake wasn't seismic, it was surgical. Pam Bondi emerged from the front steps of DOJ, the last time she would walk through those doors not as an attorney, but as a chapter in someone else's deposition. The press swarmed like hornets, lenses cocked and fingers ready. She didn't flinch. Her voice was level, rehearsed, as if trying to carve a final line into the narrative. "I did what I believed was right," she said. "That's all any of us can do." But the crowd didn't buy the memoir in the making. Protesters lined the barricades, arms raised, voices unified. "You didn't believe. You executed." And in that split second, the contrast between Bondi's polished detachment and the raw indictment from the sidewalk became the last photograph America would remember her by. Kash Patel, the architect of the Quiet War, didn't show. Not to a courtroom, not to a press call, not even to his usual defense segment on late-night conservative media. His name vanished from booking sheets, his face from every screen. No comment became a silence so loud it sounded like strategy or surrender. Back inside the marble corridors of Congress, Jasmine Crockett took the floor one last time, not with fire, but with something colder, something heavier. "We didn't bring down a department," she said. "We uncovered what it became." There was no applause, only stillness. Because when truth finally arrives, it doesn't need ovation. It needs witnesses. Then, AOC stepped to the podium. No spotlight, no mic, just a small candle in her hand and a sentence that pierced through the static of a broken country. "We didn't just save lives," she said quietly. "We saved the mirror America was too afraid to look into." The candle flickered once, then held steady, and for the first time in years, no one interrupted. Not the networks, not the pundits, not even history, because in that final moment, there was nothing left to deny, only the reflection that remained.